much. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here and to be in front of all of you. Thank you to Sarah Mohammed and GAPF for inviting us here, because I do think we have so many things that we can share, and we need to work together, because this is not a local issue. It is an international human rights issue, and we do need to work together. I think the change in law in Sweden is very, very positive. I think generally any change in the law is very often a first crucial step in changing the status quo and starting to defend people and survivors. But I think obviously the law is only one of many steps, and it's only the first step. If, just to give you as an example, female genital mutilation has been illegal in Britain for 30 years, but there has only been prosecutions recently, and only 2 so far. So there is also a need for many things that were mentioned earlier, but also the political will to make a difference and to bring changes in people's lives. And I think partly this has to do, and a large part of this has to do, and still has to do, with the fact that it's seen to be culturally insensitive to intervene. And you know, if you don't intervene, it's seen to be culturally sensitive, and if you do intervene, it's seen to be racist and discrimination against communities. And as Chas so clearly mentioned, this is a child protection issue and a welfare issue. But I do want to say that this change in attitude in Britain and also in Sweden has to really, it's thanks to the work of many women's rights campaigners like Never Forget Pela and Fadimedagarna, and groups like ours, One Law for All in Britain and Southall Black Sisters, that has tried to explain and make people understand that, you know, culture is not something that is homogeneous. There are many different types of beliefs and attitudes within a given culture and community. There is no such thing as one Muslim community or you know, Iraqi community or Iranian community, just as there isn't one Swedish community. There are differences of opinion, there's a lot of dissent. And in a sense, you know, if you look at Fadima, who we are here to honor as well, she represented the best of a culture of dissent and resistance. And there are many within these communities that are considered homogeneous that are resisting and that are dissenting. And I think it actually, rather than being anti-racist, there is a deep-seated racism when people who are often citizens, and especially when you're looking at the question of children, their rights seem to be different only because they're deemed to be other, and you know, it's their culture, let's leave them to it. And we do see this in many areas. Forced marriage, of course, is one, honor killings is another. But in Britain, for example, we see this in a wide variety of ways. For example, with the acceptance, even by the government, of Sharia courts in that country that are practicing forced marriage and child marriages as well. And I know just quite recently, you know, you've had even people in the police commissioners saying that they don't want to deal with some of these issues because it would be discrimination against a given community. And the reality is that, you know, why is your default the religious rights and the regressive imams and Islamist organizations, for example, and not, why don't you see others in that community that need protection and defense? Why don't you look at it as a defense of people's rights rather than being so worried about a culture and community that is, in a sense, imagined in many instances? And obviously, you know, it makes great sense that you have an organization that deals with honor killings and crimes working now on the issue of forced marriages, because you see a very direct link that many of those facing honor crimes have also are threatened with forced marriage. And there's a couple of cases, I mean, Sarah just told me of one last 2 nights ago where the family took the girl back home and gave her the option and choice of either marrying someone who was 70 years old, someone who was 10 years older than her, or never coming back to Sweden. And so she chose to marry the man who was 10 years older than her and to return to Sweden. And what's interesting is that the husband actually ended up being a really nice guy, and they actually fell in love with each other, and he was giving her freedoms that she didn't have by her parents. So she was allowed not to wear the veil anymore, go out and continue her education. And the parents then tried to put pressure on her to divorce the man, because the point is control of female sexuality. It doesn't matter, divorce is no longer, a scandal, as long as you're divorcing the right man that gives you too many freedoms, And so, this is important to look at it from a protection issue, because her culture and the man she was forcibly married to, who she fell in love with, they had a very different culture than the one of her parents. We've had a couple of cases where we've also dealt with this issue. I also work with people who've left Islam, through the Council of Ex-Muslims, because we believe that because we're living in a situation where the religious right has political power and can actually execute people for leaving Islam, that as atheists we need to come out publicly and say that we're ex-Muslims and we have a right to live without fear of threats and intimidation. So I've worked with quite a few people who've also been sent back home because parents have found out that they're atheists, and who have been at risk of forced marriage. And I'll just give you one example of that. It was a woman, she was 17 years old, and she was sent back to Sudan. And she contacted the embassy initially, and they told her that she should wait till she's 18 and then come and get a passport for them, and she can travel back home by herself. But the reality is that in a country like Sudan, you can't leave without the permission of a male guardian because of Sharia law. And so basically they were no help at all. And after she contacted us, we contacted the Forced Marriages Unit, and then they took action, and very quickly she was returned back to Britain. But even, sometimes with all these laws and systems in place, if the person at the consulate doesn't know what to do, and the girl doesn't have an option to be in touch with people like us, she would have not been able to return back to Britain. And I think, one of the problems here, if we look at this issue internationally, is that, in many countries where these girls and women are returned, forced marriage is actually part of the law. Child marriage is part of the law. So in Iran, for example, as a result of public pressure in Iran, the child marriage age has been raised from 9 to 13 for girls and 15 for boys. However, even small children can be married just by the father requiring it, the male guardian asking for it. And there are actually, large numbers of child marriages in Iran. Every 15 minutes, an underage girl is married in Iran. And in the first 9 months of 2013, you've got 30,000 girls who've been married under the age of 15. And don't forget, 15 is the age of marriage, supposedly, in Iran. And so you've even got laws. Recently, the Islamic Assembly in Iran passed a bill which allows for fathers to marry their adopted girls. And this is so that she doesn't have to wear a veil in the house in front of him, and her sexuality and honor can be protected. And so this is definitely an international issue. Girls being sent back to many countries will face these same things in the law itself and receive very little protection. And that's why, of course, it's important to make sure that they're not abducted in the first place. But second of all, that we work on this issue at an international scale. We can't just think this is a Swedish problem or only care about citizens who are British. We need to, like any other human rights issue, look at it on an international scale and come to a position where we can say that forced marriage, child marriage, I don't know why we even call it marriage, because it's, it's sexual abuse and rape of children, has no place in the 21st century. And obviously, I think when we talk about children particularly, the issue of choice is an absurd one. You know, we don't ask whether children chose to go to school or not, chose to work or not. We say that children must be protected from child labor, they must be protected from being taken out of school. And again, you know, asking a child if she chose to be married or not, I think is an absurd one. And we need to realize that this is a child protection issue, that we have to hold children and people more important than culture, than religion, than anything else. And particularly when we think about the fact that these are citizens of many European countries as well. The fact that so little has been done, and it's taken so long to do this, is a scandal in and of itself. I just want to end by saying that obviously racism and xenophobia is a very big issue for us here in Europe, and I think that while we combat child marriages, forced marriages, honor killings, we must also simultaneously combat xenophobia and the far right, whose, in my opinion, politics are no different fundamentally than the politics of the religious right and the Islamists. You know, it comes from a very inhuman, very dehumanizing perspective that places collective blame on entire people for the crimes of, you know, a section of the population, very often the religious right itself. As I mentioned in the talk I gave on on Saturday, is that you know, we need to look at this as a universal rights issue. Rights are not Western, they are universal, and there are many people across the world fighting for it. We also have to defend uncompromisingly secularism and the separation of religion from the state, not just for Europeans, but for people everywhere. There are many people fighting and dying for secularism as we speak in Iran, in Tunisia, in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, and we need to look at their fight as our own. And finally, I do want to repeat that, you know, this is not about a clash of civilizations. It is a clash between the civilized and the uncivilized. And by uncivilized, I don't mean people over there. It includes people on the religious right, including the Hindu right, the Christian right, the Jewish right, and first and foremost, the Islamic right. And it is a battle between all of those of us who want equality, who want secularism, who want an end to forced marriages, versus the theocrats and those who are misogynist and don't want to give and allow people to have their rights and freedom. So it is a clash between us. It's taking place in Sweden, in Britain, as well as in Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, and elsewhere. And it is a fight that, in a sense, we must win if we are going to protect all of our children, not just Swedish children, but children everywhere. Thank you.